Welcome to the lecture series on vitamins and nutrition. Today we are going to look at one more fat soluble vitamin, vitamin E. This is a continuation from the previous session what we have been looking at, and in this session we are going to look at little more in detail on vitamin E's absorption and its role in physiologic response and what are different kinds of deficiency diseases that might result from vitamin E. Whenever we talk about deficiency diseases for vitamins, it's not always the same. Their contribution is dependent on the role that they play, the biochemical role that they play in human physiology. Now, if you look at vitamin E, we have seen elaborately about the structure of vitamin E and its overall function, dietary sources and so on. So, before we go into the biochemical role, I thought I can actually explain little bit more on one more important feature of these vitamins, especially concerned with the structure of vitamin. If you look at over here, vitamin E comes in around 8 different types. Primarily, we categorize vitamin E into two types. One type would be there as tocopherol and the other one as the tocotrienol. We have seen this in the earlier session. I want to emphasize little more so that you would know the difference between these two vitamins structurally. So if you look at the primary ring, this is the primary ring, and here you have the tocol nucleus, or what we call it like the chroma nucleus, and here you have a side chain. Now in the tocopherol family of compounds, this side chain, as you see over here, is completely saturated, whereas if you look at tocotrienols, can you see over there, the side chains contain alternate double bonds, or as we call it as isoprenoid units. So this isoprenoid units, which is a side chain that plays the difference in terms of the structural identity that you see between tocotrienols and tocopherol. Now between tocotrienol and tocopherol, if you ask the question which one is very active, so tocopherols are supposed to be very active, and even if tocotrienol is fed as a source of vitamin E, our body is capable of converting this. Not only our body, most of the mammalian living system is capable of converting tocotrienol into tocopherol, and the representative, or as we call it, the prototype version of a vitamin E, the active form of vitamin E, is alpha tocopherol. Now if you look at the source of tocotrienol, most of the vegetable sources, because you know very well vegetable oils do contain unsaturated fatty acids, polyunsaturated fatty acids or monounsaturated fatty acids. So that's the reason most of the vitamin E obtained from vegetable sources, plant sources, contain tocotrienol, whereas if you consider tocopherol, mostly it comes from animal sources, egg yolk and many of other animal sources we have seen earlier could be a good way of obtaining natural tocopherol. Now you look at this in the previous slide, you would be aware of these pink dots which represent the chiral center. We have seen about them in detail in the last session. So today I am not going to dwell much on it, but I am going to move quickly into the biochemical role that tocopherols play in our body. Now we have seen already the properties and we have seen the variety of sources of tocopherol, and especially when we look at the wheat germ oil, as we call it, the unsaponified version of the wheat germ oil is rich in vitamin E. So almond is a good source of vitamin E, and we have seen the daily requirements of vitamin E and vitamin E sources from both vegetarian variety or plant foods, and again we have the animal sources of tocopherol. Now if we go into the transportation of vitamin E, we have seen this in the last session, and we saw that you require emulsified version and you require bile as an important component in the absorption of fat soluble vitamins, and this applies to vitamin E as well. And we have also seen on the chylomicron based transportation. So we also saw how vitamin E and lipoprotein combinations is the one which exactly makes sure the vitamin E would be available in different tissues. So we saw this, how vitamin V is transported inside systemic circulation and how it reaches every organ. Now if you are going to look at the aspect of vitamin E, if you carefully look at deficiency of vitamin E, compared to many other vitamins, vitamin E deficiency is very rare. In fact, we could say vitamin E deficiency is basically extremely rare, as I've told you now, and primarily we consider vitamin E deficiency as something like that could happen when a person is under physiological stress, or maybe when there is lots of free radical damage happening under inflammatory conditions. Additional dose of vitamin E would help in the alleviation of inflammatory responses, and that's the reason we consider vitamin E supplementation to be very valuable in such individuals. As a whole, if you consider, vitamin E is quite a common vitamin, and getting source of vitamin E for a person with an average health and with an average consumption of food which is balanced with vitamins, minerals and macronutrients, you don't find big difference. But still, vitamin E is extremely essential in terms of building up and for maintenance. So if you supplement an individual with vitamin E, you would be able to really help this individual fight immune responses. So that's why for people with systemic illness, like let's say people who suffer from diabetes, or people who suffer from hypertension, or people who suffer from chronic illness like cancer or terminal illness, supplementing with vitamin E would tremendously help in the outcome of prognosis. Now you look at over here, we saw in the last session, and vitamin E is lipophilic in nature. We saw how vitamin E plays a role in preventing oxidation of many essential compounds. You always see vitamin E taken along with vitamin C, or in other words, other antioxidant category of compounds. Under this category of compounds, you have phosphoric acid, you have pyruvic acid, you have vitamin C and vitamin E. So generally you find most of the nutritive supplements taken either from a natural source or the one which happens in the normal physiologic process in our body will always have these combination of antioxidants together. Now it would be very apt to use this word as a free radical scavenger for vitamin E. So if you look at it as a free radical scavenger, it exhibits its antioxidant activity. So you might wonder like how it is able to exhibit its antioxidant function. So I want you to look at the structure of tocopherols, and can you see over there you have a hydroxy group here, and this hydroxy group is basically the phenolic group. Compared to a typical phenol, it's little unstable, this hydroxy group, and because it's little unstable compared to a phenolic group, it can have I would say a relatively preferential treatment to oxygens, and that's what explains the antioxidant effect of tocopherol. Now if you go further, we are going to look at little more components of how they are able to exhibit protective effect. So you see, they play an extremely important role in the maintenance of cell membrane. So you see cell membrane integrity, what do you mean by that? So all these cell membranes are bilipid phospholayer, okay, surrounding cells, and you have plenty of lipid molecules, and constantly there is a threat of peroxidation. So peroxides being generated as a byproduct of cellular metabolism would now be a threat to the cell membrane. So they can go and they can interfere with the cell membrane integrity and could destroy it. So vitamin E present in the cell membrane, or rather I would say inside the cell, they try to scavenge all these free radical and prevent them attacking the membrane. Instead, vitamin E would preferentially trap them. So that's what we mean by free radical scavengers. So when they try to trap them, they get oxidized, and this exactly helps in preserving the cell membrane. So let's say if a cell is constantly under threat of free radical bombardment, okay, you find these vitamin E preferentially scavenging all these free radicals, especially the peroxides, and trying to preserve the cell membrane integrity. And this also explains their role in anti-inflammatory function, and also explains their role during DNA synthesis, where there would be lots of nicking and rejoining activities happening inside the nucleus, and there would be tremendous stress in the repair mechanism, and obviously in such cases exposure to free radical would be unavoidable, and vitamin E would be there helping in the process and maintaining a smooth way of carrying out all these functions. So you see, immune response. So any kind of immune response, especially immune responses concerned with ADCC, it's called antibody dependent cellular cytotoxicity. Most of the macrophages involved, they will be voluntarily releasing free radicals to damage the surface of the pathogens, especially multicellular pathogens, where ADCC kind of mechanisms often take place in clearing the parasites. And vitamin E tries to dampen this unnecessary immune responses that's happening over there. What do you mean by unnecessary? So these free radical damages, which were originally meant in only destroying the pathogenic surfaces, could play a very tricky role in causing casualties of endogenous structures. So vitamin E would help in preserving the endogenous cellular components from its own attack by free radicals. So that's what we mean by stimulating immune responses and thereby maintaining the immune responses. The stimulation is for activating these immune cells to attack the pathogenic surfaces. At the same time, on the note of preserving the host's surfaces, vitamin E would play an essential role. So you see that, as I've told you earlier, with vitamin A, C and unsaturated fatty acids, actually vitamin E would preferentially take the role of preserving all these three. So A and C, for a full-fledged function, need vitamin E, and polyunsaturated fatty acids, to prevent them getting oxidized, vitamin E would preferentially absorb the free radicals. So you see over there, so when you talk about membrane labile nature, and especially for RBC, it's like quite common. So it protects RBCs. So if RBC membrane gets damaged, what will happen? There would be hemolysis. So what do you mean by hemolysis? The RBC surfaces would be ruptured and RBCs would be destroyed. Continued hemolysis would lead to, I would say, severe type of anemia, where RBC destruction would be rampant. So taking vitamin E, or rather vitamin E supplements present in our body, would help in increasing or maintaining the lifespan of RBCs. So that's what I mentioned by the preservation of cellular integrity, and cellular membrane integrity in this context of preventing RBC hemolysis is extremely important. So one more component we need to remember: whenever you talk about vitamin E, always remember their role in selenium metabolism. So what do you mean by selenium metabolism? Here we have an important role. So most of the, I would say, enzymes, there is an enzyme when we talk about lipid peroxidation. This enzyme is called the glutathione peroxidase. And these enzymes efficiently use selenium as a cofactor. So for effective absorption of selenium and effective availability of selenium in glutathione peroxidases, you require vitamin E. So without vitamin E, glutathione peroxidase would not be able to really acquire selenium to a level to carry out free radical function. See, when we talk about free radical scavenging activity, we can talk about this in two levels. So first level is vitamin E getting preferentially absorbing all the free radicals, that's one part of it. And the other part is there are more efficient antioxidant systems like enzymatic based antioxidant maintenance systems, like in this case of peroxidases, glutathione peroxidases. So they directly neutralize the peroxides. Now for their function you need vitamin E. See, in that way vitamin B inherently acts like an antioxidant within its own capacity, and in addition to that peroxidases needs to be constantly replenished to make them available in clearing all the hydrogen peroxides, and vitamin E would help these peroxides do their function. So that way their job is angled in two different directions. So selenium availability is essential for many of these biochemical enzymes involved in free radical scavenging. So what it does, it helps in the absorption and transportation and maintenance of selenium. So that way they indirectly contribute in the antioxidant function of other proteins who are involved in a similar mechanism of action. So in that way they help in integrity of many of these antioxidant proteins and help in the scavenging of these unnecessary free radicals. Now if you look at it, what will happen if vitamin E is not there? There would be vitamin A and carotene will get destroyed and their function will not be realized at all. So for creatine in the skeletal muscle storage, and vitamin E is essential. And you also look at absorption of many of important lipids and amino acids, you need a peripheral amount of vitamin E availability in these areas of absorption. And then you have, let's say, if these free radicals are let loose, what will happen? They could self-destruct and there could be necrosis, especially if you look at liver, which is a site with lots of metabolic actions happening, and it's completely unavoidable to really remove all those free radicals until otherwise if you have an access to fresh dose of antioxidants. So in this case vitamin E in the liver, although liver is not the primary organ for storing vitamin E, but you nevertheless have sufficient amount of vitamin E storage in the liver, that vitamin E would help in the local preservation of hepatocytes. So you see over there, it's also used in the treatment of atherosclerosis, so inflammation. So when you have repeated inflammation of capillary vessels, especially important blood vessels, the vasculature would be at high risk of getting damaged. So vitamin E supplementation, eventually, it's not like you take this therapy and immediately you reverse all the conditions. No, it doesn't work that way. Although if you could regularly supplement and make vitamin E available in those site of actions where an anti-inflammatory response is required, a gradual supplementation of vitamin E would surely make a difference. So you see there, one more important area that we need to consider is basically the nocturnal muscle cramps connected with, I would say, musculature. So there is one more point you need to consider, the cataract. So the cataract, and I would say you have other tumors concerned with that. So cataract could result from damage to the vital structures in the eye, and this damage can actually be so hazardous and the person can eventually lose sight. And in that way you find these vitamins, tocopherols, playing an important role in preventing, I would say, these inflammatory tissue damages. So you look over here, as I've told you, glutathione peroxidase. So synergistically with selenium, which is a cofactor of glutathione peroxidase. So you see over there, so you have requirement of selenium and vitamin E are quite inseparable. They help each other. So you see in a aging process, in any kind of aging mechanism, you always have these free radicals giving trouble. So in such cases, vitamin E would be an excellent supplement to slow down the process of aging. In fact, there are many studies even in animal and even in clinical trials which suggest taking vitamin E on a long term basis, okay, have plenty of protective effects. It could even delay aging process and all aging process related degenerative conditions, what we call it like Alzheimer's disease and Alzheimer's related neuromuscular damages resulting from any kind of paralytic nerve damages, resulting in turn because of the local high levels of free radical in the tissues, neuronal tissue, can be effectively addressed on a supplementation of vitamin E. So you see over there the industrial use of vitamin E. So as I've told you, it's much easy to deliver vitamin E along with A and D in lipid related environment. So you find most of the vegetable oils and saturated vegetable oils are fortified with extra dose of vitamin E. So this might give you a indication that yeah, they are normally present with vitamin E. The reason is vitamin E absorption is good in the presence of these lipids. So it was, what do you say, a coincidence that keeping vitamin E along with the oil for absorption is acceptable. But if you closely notice, you also find that vitamin E prevents rancidity of these oils. So what is rancidity? So rancidity means spontaneous oxidation of unsaturated oils. Most commonly you find this among vegetable oils and polyunsaturated oils. You just keep them for a very long period of time and you expose them to oxygen, a natural auto-oxidation process sets in. And this auto-oxidation process creates rancidity. In other words, I would say esters get esterified, degraded, and this degraded esters have their own flavor or smell which will not be acceptable as a proper, I would say, food flavor. So in that case, a typical food with the customized flavor due to the combination of microbiome present in them would now stink. That kind of an effect is what rancidity gives for food substances, especially food substances rich in unsaturated fatty acids. And adding vitamin E to the dose would prevent such kind of rancidity. So now you understand you have dual purpose. It's not only preserving the food and preserving the food in terms of acting like an antioxidant, but when we consume the food with vitamin E, we also get this extra dose of vitamin E which was already added in the food. Although it might appear it's acting like a kind of an antioxidant, the same job it could even do in our system. So that way vitamin E addition not only would fortify the food for its enhanced nutritive value, but also this helps as a formulation aid in preserving the property of the food substance. So that's how most of the oils, if you go and check up in the supermarkets, you would find naturally vitamin E, vitamin A and vitamin D would be added as extra bit of nutrients for fortification purposes. So among them, vitamin E is one of the most commonly selected vitamins in addition to vitamin D. Now if you look at it, so what all damages it can give rise to. So you see the free radicals. So by the way, what do you mean by free radical? So whenever there is a homolytic cleavage of electronegative elements, like let's say for chlorine or electronegative elements containing oxygen, okay, so you find them when a covalent bond is broken, either there could be heterolytic cleavage or homolytic cleavage. So if there is a homolytic cleavage, each of the electron which was donated to make the covalent bond would now go separate, and this leads to the generation of free radicals. So free radicals are extremely active, extremely sensitive, and they can quickly trigger a reaction. So you see over there are some of the examples of the free radicals. Hydronium ion, you call it, like I would say oxygen free radical, then hydroxyl free radical, carbon tetrachloride, trichloride as a free radical, chlorine atom as such a free radical, and you have obviously free radicals from hydrogen peroxide. So you see over there, these free radicals have the tendency to snatch the electrons, okay, because they themselves want some electrons desperately. So they are extremely, I would say, reactive in absorbing these electrons and bringing stability or forming a covalent bond. So now you see over there, free radicals target polyunsaturated fatty acids from cell membrane, as I've told you. And if you look at how they are able to do it, so I think in the coming session we would elaborate more on the antioxidant effect of vitamin E. Now I would give you, could there be a reason for prolonged vitamin E deficiency? Yes, it's possible. So here we have a sixth reason: dietary deficiency, sprue, and obstructive jaundice, because bile secretion, which is so essential in absorption of vitamin E, is not available. Then pancreatitis, inflammation of pancreas, steatorrhea, it means what? Passing of fat, unabsorbed fat from the bowels, and hypolipoproteinemia, because it's extremely essential in the transportation and in the formation of chylomicron. So all this can to some extent cause vitamin E deficiency for a prolonged period of time. So we are going to wind up today's session. So today's session focused more on the biochemical and antioxidant role of vitamin E, and we were looking at how it is able to exhibit its antioxidant activity. In the coming session, we would discuss more on the antioxidant activity, and we will proceed with the deficiency diseases. Thank you.